While an 8-year-old boy questioned Melania Trump if God listens, the answer dumbfounded everyone in the crowd. In this Kansas place where the horizon stretches endlessly and life moves at measured pace, one small town was ready to experience a day they would not soon forget. The annual community fair was on, a precious tradition that brought families together to celebrate their common values. The air was filled with the smell of freshly popped kettle corn mixed with the sweetness of funnel cakes and the sharp tang of barbecue smoke. Children ran around laughing, their faces painted like tigers and butterflies, while parents greeted each other near booths selling handmade crafts and homegrown produce. Amid the cheerful bustle, a quiet ripple of excitement coursed through the crowd. It was rumored that Melania Trump, the former First Lady of the United States, would be an honored guest. She was here not to make a speech or for any fanfare but to drop by and say hello to the families and meet them, thereby supporting the local school's literacy program. But there was an air of dignity about her that sucked in the audience. Near the stage, an 8-year-old boy named Ethan clutched his mother's hand tightly. His worn sneakers scuffed the dirt and his fingers nervously toyed with the cross-shaped trinket around his neck. He wasn't like most kids in general. There's something thoughtful in his demeanor that makes him appear older than his age sometimes. Life had dealt him some pretty tough lessons recently. His father, the truck driver, had been idle for months and had overheard the hushed tones of piling bills and meals stretched into nothingness. But today Ethan had a goal. He was burning with only one question, one that he wanted to be put before only Melania Trump. He didn't know if he would get the opportunity to speak with her, but the thought filled his young heart with equal parts hope and fear. The crowd gathered near the stage as Melania arrived, dressed elegantly in a soft blue dress. She smiled warmly, waving to the families who had come to see her. She moved gracefully through the crowd, stopping to greet children and parents alike. Ethan stood frozen, his small frame almost lost in the sea of people. His mother gave his hand a gentle squeeze and whispered, "You'll regret it if you don't try, honey." He nodded, summoning all the courage he could find. He slowly pulled his hand from his mother's and stepped forward, weaving through the crowd of people until he was just a few feet from the former First Lady. She turned and their eyes met, and for a moment the noise faded away. Ethan's heart was pounding as he gripped his necklace tighter. He was unsure of his voice but knew that was all he needed. This was the moment. It was that fraction of a moment of silence where their eyes were locked on one another. Some unspoken sense of connection arose, which strengthened him enough to take the leap. The whole world became distorted for Ethan. The vibrancy of the noise of the crowd faded as it narrowed into just the woman before him. His small hands were shaking, the cross in his fingers digging into his palm like an anchor. Melania Trump knelt slightly, her elegant movements deliberate and warm, so she was almost at eye level with him. The kindness in her expression steadied him, but the lump in his throat refused to go away. "Hi there," she said softly, her accent softening her words. "What's your name?" "Ethan," he stuttered, his voice barely above a whisper. He felt his cheeks flush as he glanced nervously at the crowd that had begun to quiet, their attention drawn to the small boy and the former First Lady. "Well, Ethan, it's so nice to meet you," she said, her smile encouraging. "What's on your mind?" Ethan swallowed hard, willing himself to speak. His voice shook, but he spoke in slow, clear language, weighed heavily with thoughts he had lain awake over for too many nights. "Mrs. Trump," he started, with his big wet eyes brimming over, "do you reckon God hears us any more when he makes us forget?" His question dangled in the air like a string of a thread, muffling the muttering of the watchers. A wave of emotion splashed the crowd, some wriggling uncomfortably, others visibly stirred. Ethan's voice had cracked on that last word, his vulnerability bare before everyone like an exposed wound. Melania's expression softened even further, her mouth opening as if she just stopped breathing for a moment. She reached out and gently placed her hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Why do you ask me that, Ethan?" she asked, her tone soft but laced with a serious curiosity. Ethan hesitated and looked down before raising his gaze to hers. "Sometimes I hear my mom crying at night. She tries to hide it, but I know my dad's been sad too ever since he lost his job. We pray every night, but it feels like nothing changes." He paused, his small voice quivering, "and sometimes I feel like maybe God's not listening to us anymore." Gasps and murmurs broke out in the crowd, quickly hushed by the weight of the moment. Ethan's raw honesty had struck a chord, a reminder of struggles so many families faced but rarely spoke of aloud. The little boy's words were not just his own, they were the unspoken fears of countless others, carried by a voice too young to hide behind pretense. Melania took a moment, her gaze unwavering as she processed the depth of his question. But as the crowd waited, breathless with anticipation, Her response carried the promise of something far deeper than mere words. Melania reached out gently with both of her hands on his small shoulders and steadied him as though anchoring him to the moment. When she did speak, the tone was all calm, warm measuredness, the warmth embracing Ethan and the audience itself. "Ethan," she began, her accent lending a soft musicality to her words, "I want you to listen to me very carefully, because what I'm about to tell you is something I believe with all my heart." The boy's eyes stayed locked on hers, wide and brimming with anticipation. The crowd leaned in, captivated by the sincerity radiating from the former First Lady. "God always hears us," she said, her tone firm yet soothing. "Even when it feels like no one is listening, He is there. Sometimes, though He doesn't answer as we expect Him to, He answers through the people around us, the love of your mother, strength of your father, and even in moments like this, when someone like you has the courage to speak from their heart." Ethan blinked rapidly, tears spilling down his cheeks as her words reached a place deep within him. And continued Melania, her voice steady but full of emotion. "I know it's hard when things feel heavy, like they're never going to get better," she said, briefly glancing at the crowd with a sweep of her gaze over parents who nodded silently with their own struggles reflected in Ethan's story. "But God doesn't forget us. He gives us the strength to keep going even when it feels impossible. And Ethan, by asking that, you reminded all of us here that faith does not disappear, it grows when shared." Her words seemed to settle deep within, like an unsaid prayer throughout the crowd. Ethan's smaller shoulders started relaxing under her touch, and he loosened his grip on the necklace. He sniffled, rubbing his face on the sleeve of his shirt, but tears just kept coming, of comfort rather than sadness. Melania reached out to touch the cross necklace he was holding in his hand. "This little cross," she whispered softly, "reminds you that you're never alone even when it seems you have been forgotten. Wear it proudly, Ethan, because it represents hope. And hope is what keeps us moving forward." Ethan nodded slowly, his chest rising and falling as he took a deep breath, the crowd around them utterly still, many wiping their eyes, caught in the profound beauty of the moment. Some parents instinctively reached for their children's hands, while others exchanged glances of quiet understanding. Melania let go of the necklace and stood up, her eyes scanning the audience. "We all need to remember this," she said, her voice now carrying to everyone gathered. "We are stronger when we lift each other up. Faith isn't just something we keep inside, it's something we share." Her words were met with a soft murmur of agreement, some breaking into applause, others simply standing in silent reflection. Ethan looked up at her, his tears finally ceasing as a small, shy smile crossed his face. But just as things seemed to settle, a woman in the crowd raised her hand and spoke, her voice breaking as she added another layer of depth to the unfolding event. The woman stepped forward, her face etched in lines and emotion, her voice quivering yet tight as she said, "Mrs. Trump, what you just said, I think it's what we all needed to hear. Life hasn't been easy for many of us lately, we've all felt forgotten at some point. But today, hearing this, it reminds me that maybe we're not as alone as we think." Melania turned to her, offering the same steady warmth she had shown Ethan. "It's true," she replied, addressing the woman and the crowd. "We are never alone, but it's up to us to remind each other of that." The toddler in the woman's arms reached out toward Melania with innocent curiosity, prompting a soft chuckle from those nearby. Melania extended a hand, gently brushing the child's fingers, creating a fleeting but tender moment that eased the heaviness lingering in the air. Ethan, still standing quietly beside his mother, watched the interaction, a newfound sense of calm settling over him. His mother knelt down, pulling him into a tight embrace, whispering, "I'm so proud of you." Her words carried a weight of gratitude, not just for her son's bravery but for the connection this moment had forged among everyone present. The atmosphere changed and conversations rippled through the crowd as strangers exchanged stories of their struggles. A father standing nearby spoke about losing his small business and the uncertainty it brought to his family, while a young woman shared how she had battled loneliness after moving to the town. Each story carried a common thread, the need to feel seen, to feel heard. Ethan's question had unlocked something deep within the community, as if his courage had given everyone permission to lay their burdens down, if only for a moment, and to find solace in knowing they weren't alone. Melania, still near the stage, listened attentively as the stories poured out. She didn't interrupt or try to respond to each one but stood as a quiet witness to the humanity unfolding before her. The sense of connection was palpable, stretching beyond words, weaving the crowd into something stronger, more united. With the first shades of sunset illuminating the sky as shades of orange and pink, the community fair, initially an event of playfulness, transformed itself into a testing march of faith and strength. Melania moved back into the microphone once again, her voice carrying over the whispers of the crowd. "Today," she said, "Ethan reminded us all of something important. We need each other. No matter how difficult life becomes, no matter how forgotten we may be, there's always someone who wants to listen, someone who wants to care. Let's not forget that as we leave here tonight." The crowd erupted into applause, a release of emotion that felt like a collective exhale. Now Ethan stood tall, his mother's hand upon his shoulder, small but mighty in asking such a brave question to which something greater than he had ever imagined stirred. As the applause started to die away and the proceedings were winding down, whispers began spreading like wildfire regarding what just occurred, to make sure the day would remain etched within the hearts and minds of the onlookers. It didn't stop there in that afternoon when people left the fairgrounds packing their strollers and folding up their chairs, because the tales and emotions exchanged through Melania still were present. Some of these individuals never met one another. Some of them had promised each other a visit for coffee and some others an exchange of babysitting for each other's kids. That is the feeling of unison which some carried within them silently. Ethan and his mother walked home into a sky strewn with stars, a gentle Kansas breeze buffeting them gently on their walk home. His mother gripped his hand firmly and looked down at him, both proud and tenderly affectionate. "You did something very brave today," she said quietly. "You reminded everyone that we're all connected, even when it doesn't feel like it." Ethan nodded, still clutching in his hand the small cross necklace she had made him. "Do you think things will get better now, Mom?" he asked, his voice hesitant but hopeful. She paused for a moment, looking down at her son. "I think they already are," she said, her words across town. Similar conversations unfolded, carrying a conviction that hadn't been there before. In the local diner, neighbors who had never met before sat at the same table recounting the moment Ethan asked his question. One man, a mechanic named Joe, described how he struggled to find new work after his shop closed. "Hearing that boy talk about his family," he said, shaking his head, "it made me realize I've been so wrapped up in my own troubles that I forgot how many others are going through the same thing." Another woman, a retired teacher named Eleanor, nodded in agreement. "It's easy to feel alone even in a small town like this. But that little boy, he reminded us of the power of being vulnerable, of sharing what's on our hearts." The conversations didn't stop there. Over the next few days, stories about the fair began circulating on social media. A video someone had recorded of Ethan and Melania went viral, capturing the raw emotion of their interaction. Comments flooded in from all corners of the country, from people so moved to tears, others who felt forgotten themselves, and others finding hope in places they never would have thought possible. Church groups in neighboring towns organized food drives and support networks inspired by Ethan's courage. Parents who had been quietly struggling began opening up to friends and neighbors, seeking and offering support. The impact rippled out far beyond the small Kansas town itself and into the hearts of people listening from afar. Ethan remained mostly oblivious to it all. To him, it wasn't about the attention or the praise, it was about asking a question that weighed upon his young heart. And though he could not express the feeling, now he felt less heavy, like a part of the weight that he had carried was gone. The days turned into weeks and the town itself began to change. Strangers would smile at one another more, acts of kindness big and small became a way of life, and through it all, that day at the fair was forever etched into memory, a beacon of hope and a reminder that one simple question could ignite something that spread further than anyone had ever expected. But as life slowly returned to its rhythm, the town was left with one undeniable truth: that the power of faith and connection wasn't something that came to them only during that fleeting moment but was instead something they could carry forward together. Months later, life in the small Kansas town had shifted subtly but profoundly. The community fair was still a subject of discussion, especially on Sundays after church or while stretching their muscles at the grocery store. People told stories of how bravely Ethan stood to ask his innocent-hearted question that united the strangers into a crowd. At school, Ethan became a little taller and more confident as he found new friends. His teachers found something in him that they never found in many other students, a quiet strength that inspired others. He still wore the cross necklace every day, a symbol of the moment that changed not just his perspective but also the lives of those around him. For his family, the road ahead wasn't without challenges. His father kept looking for stable work, and his mother worked long shifts trying to keep the house going, but it felt almost if that weight had been lightened a bit. Now, neighbors were dropping by unannounced with casseroles, babysitting offers, and even job leads. This new communal feeling made previously overwhelming burdens a communal one. The story of the encounter between Ethan and Melania did not end with their town. News outlets picked it up, framing it as a reminder of the enduring power of faith and connection in difficult times. Letters and emails poured in from people all over the country, some sharing their own struggles, others expressing how deeply the story had touched them. For Melania Trump, the day had left an indelible mark. She told me about Ethan in interviews with such admiration for his courage that was a testament to the strength of the human spirit. Sometimes it's the smallest voices, she said, that remind us of the biggest truths. The lesson was clear. No matter how alone we may feel, there is always someone listening, always someone willing to stand beside us. Faith is not just about waiting for answers. It's about finding strength in one another and recognizing the small moments of grace that guide us forward. As the town of Ethan prepared for the next year's fair, a new tradition began to take shape. A portion of the proceeds would now go towards supporting struggling families in the community, a tangible legacy born from a young boy's question and the profound moment that followed. For Ethan, life carried on as it always had, but he walked with a little more confidence, a little more faith. He knew now, without doubt, that God heard him, not necessarily in the ways he was looking for but in the ways he was finding them. Love, kindness. And as the sun went down on another day in a town that had learned to lean on one another, the story of that one question continued to inspire, a quiet but powerful reminder that even the smallest voices can kindle a light in the dark. If this story touched your heart, take some time to consider the power of faith, connection, and courage in your life. Share this message with someone who may need it today, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that inspire and bring us together.